Where to start this? Well, I guess I would have to begin by saying everyone in my family is sensitive to the paranormal side of things. Case in point, my sisters can hear the things that go bump in the night, while my father had a sort of guardian angel act as an early warning for when things are going to go bad. My mother never spoke about it to us, but her mother said she was sensitive too. As for me, well, I guess you could say I'm a sort of exorcist. I say sort of because the church recognizes me as the level of a deacon, meaning that I can hand out communion, but I can't give a sermon. This is probably why our family members are considered so strange, at least in a way. It isn't like we don't have friends or relationships. It is just that we don't perceive things the same as others do. Now, since that is out of the way, let's get into what happened. It was the middle of summer, so of course, the kids weren't at school, and a few of them thought it would be nice to stop at my place on their way to their vacation spot. I would go with them, but you have to be invited. Then again, I'm not sure if I can even take off work. A decent job is getting difficult to come by for an old warhorse like me. Well, I am renting a rather large house for just one person. The rent in this area is pretty cheap, as long as you don't mind the commute. I'm an early riser anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. Regardless, they all arrived a bit late, which gave me enough time to have everything ready for when they came in. They had been on the road for several days at this point. That wouldn't be so bad, except that there is no privacy on the road. That meant that everyone was a little pent up and needed to get some release from the drive. With the youngest kids, this simply meant letting them run around for a few hours, and of course, letting them swim in the pool. There was only one teenager, my nephew, at 14 years old. So he swam, but I could tell he just wanted to find one of the neighbor girls to hang out with. Too bad for him, the closest neighbor's daughter was leaving for college in the fall. With all this moving around, it was nice to let the parents swim and then relax with a few cocktails. I even turned on the jacuzzi for them if they wanted. So, all in all, it was a nice afternoon for everyone. Nothing from that could have prepared us for what was going to happen. It must have been close to midnight when we finally got everyone to sleep. You would think after burning so much energy, the kids would have crashed out early, but nope. I gave my siblings and their spouses the beds while their kids were split between two of these smaller rooms. Yes, it is a 4-bedroom, but that just meant that I had to crash on the couch. Nothing wrong with that, but it does make my sleep rather light. Though it was the summer, I woke up to a slight chill in the air. I may have had the fans running, but it shouldn't have felt that cold. I was about to go back to sleep when I saw something. In the reflection of the main window, I could see the shadow of someone walking across the living room. The only light silhouetting it came from the kitchen stove that I had left on in case someone needed something from the kitchen and they wouldn't have to turn another light on. This also put my side of the couch in complete darkness. Even if somebody looked into the reflection, they wouldn't see me. As I watched for a few moments, I realized that this shadow had a clearly female form to it, but something was very, very wrong. It almost looked like its hair was extremely tall, and it was carrying a backpack. What? I thought to myself as I gained more consciousness. That doesn't make sense. No one has their hair up like that unless they just got out of the shower. But if they did, they wouldn't have put on a pack. The seconds ticked by as I began to see it more clearly. It didn't walk, but instead it seemed to glide across the floor, as if it wasn't stepping on it. The hardwood floors didn't squeak. However, I should still feel the subtle changes of the floor with every step. But nothing. Silently, I watched as it went to the hallway where 2 bedrooms were. Once it was out of sight, I silently got up and I followed it. I looked down the hall just in time to see the very edge turn to the room that the kids were in. Okay, what the heck is going on? I silently said to myself as I got to the corner of the hallway. Looking around the corner, I could see that the door to the kids' room was almost completely open. The red light from the alarm clock showed enough for my eyes to see the first bed. There was my oldest niece, sound asleep, lightly snoring as I moved slowly into the doorway. When I turned to look at the other bed, my heart skipped a beat and my blood ran cold. There was someone, or maybe I should say something, standing at the foot of my nephew's bed. It was staring at him as he silently slept. With the little bit of light I could make out the silhouette of what it was. The form was clearly that of an adult female, and a well-developed one at that, but not overly so. The long hair that fell down her back flowed right up to a set of what looked like wings attached to its lower back, just above the pelvic bone. This was bad enough, but the stranger parts were the large horns that seemed to come out halfway between the hairline and the top of the head. These horns curled back, kind of like ram horns, but did not curl back up to the ears. I was in shock at the sight of this woman that I had never seen standing in my house, seemingly watching over my kin. After about a minute, I saw my nephew roll onto his back, and that's when something odd happened. There was a sudden smell of perfume in the air. It was very subtle at first, but soon it became overwhelming. Now, something you should know about me is that I hate the smell of a strong perfume. In fact, too much perfume has made me end dates early. So the smell of this was not intoxicating as one might think, but more nauseating to me. Once the smell had permeated the room enough that I had to hold my nose to keep from gagging, she reached down and began to pull the covers off of him. Reaching down, she slowly pulled the covers down past his feet, exposing him to the night air, and then she began to move up slowly up his body. That's when I saw his eyes burst open and the fear enter them. I could see him start to struggle, but he was having trouble moving. From that point, she climbed onto the bed and began to hold him down by placing her hand on his shoulder, while the other pushed his hand down. When she moved her leg up to straddle him, I tried to stop her. That is, I tried. My body didn't want to move. It was strange, but my muscles didn't want to respond to the commands that I gave them. I was confused as I feared I wouldn't be able to stop her. By now, I had figured out what it was. Even though the logical part of my brain fought me there was no denying the truth. What had come into my house for nefarious reasons? It was a succubus. Now I'm no spring chicken, so I know a few things about the paranormal. It doesn't hurt that I dated a witch before. Plus, I had a few tricks up my sleeve. It must have sensed my fear because it turned and looked at me, still standing in the doorway. I looked at it right in the eyes, and I could see those green eyes looking back at me. These eyes were not green like you would think, but a dark green like you would see on a tractor. She still had her human irises, but the rest of her eye was that deep green. As she looked at me, her hands continued towards my nephew's body, as though it was slowly putting a dry rub on a brisket. And then she did something that I will never forget. She smiled at me. The smile was not filled with shark teeth like some would think, but instead, an almost human smile. The kind of smile someone gives you when they have pulled one over on you, and you can't do anything about it. With sheer arrogance in her voice, she said to me, "You're next," as I saw her hand begin to go lower on my nephew. While this was happening, her body seemed to get more and more visible as though she was becoming solid. Thinking fast, I needed to find a way out of the paralysis. I could have kicked myself for not realizing it sooner, but the perfume must be the reason. So, if it was a chemical reaction, then I have something for it. You see, I'm not the only one that can adjust their chemical composition, at least for a while. Think of it as adjusting your brain to push off the effects of being drunk. Many people can do it, but it is a very temporary solution, and the headache that follows is far from fun. Using this, it only took a few seconds for me to break out of the paralysis and be able to move freely again. I could see the utter terror in my nephew's eyes as she lifted her body in order to get on top of him. Sprinting from my position, I jumped onto her, causing us both to crash onto the floor. Being able to get her by surprise, I was able to take her back and get a choke on her. This proved difficult, as her horns prevented me from getting my arm into position, though I did get my other arm around her neck. Remembering my old training, I dug my heels into her thighs. It's a good thing too, because my training never covered how to do this when someone had powerful wings. She tried to pull my arm away from her neck as she violently thrashed her wings. Her wings were so powerful that with each flap, we bounced and crashed around the room. Not training against people so thin, she was able to duck her jaw and bite down hard into my arm. So much I thought that she was going to take a piece out. And grabbing her ear, I pulled enough that she screamed and lifted her head to try and alleviate the pain. This just allowed me to reset my arm into her neck. I got her now, I thought, as I could feel her supple neck against my bicep muscle and forearm. The noise must have woken everyone up, because the lights flipped on as numerous people came running into the room. Cursing coming out as the children were picked up and rushed out of the room. My brother tried to help me subdue this thing, but the violent thrashing made that impossible. I suddenly found myself wishing I had told him where I keep my firearms besides the safe. That is when that thing truly got serious. She took her tail and it penetrated my skin. Now, I've been shot before, and I would rather do that 100 times over than experience the pain I went through at that moment. And then something happened I don't think she was really ready for her. Instead of letting go, all my muscles tightened, making it nearly impossible for her to breathe, cracking her ribs, and I started cursing and using the Lord's name in vain. As I calmed down a little, I was just saying, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." And this made her begin to lose any strength she had. I'll admit I was in far too much pain to notice this until her body began to slump, and she retracted her tail. I looked at her and she looked at me in contempt, asking, "How could you have this power? You are no priest." I chuckled and told her that the army recognizes me at the level of a deacon. The hate in her eyes at that point could have stopped a herd of elephants. Moving my hand, not the one around her neck, to her forehead, I began to demand her name. Of course, she wouldn't give it, so on to plan B. I began to pray to God and Jesus to cleanse your lost child and to forgive her sins. Free her from these shackles of this form and bring her true faith as she enters your house. I continued as she began to thrash again, but this time getting weaker and weaker. This time, my brother was able to get a hold on her down, and as I reached the end of my prayer, she screamed out her name. I demanded her true name, and she looked at me with true fear for the first time. I placed my hand on her head and made the sign of the cross. This seemed to cause her even more pain, as I demanded her true name. After a few moments, she had finally said it. In truth, I expected it to be something impossible for me to pronounce, though it was surprisingly easy. I will not say it here, but I will say that before I let my grip loosen, I tested it out with a silent prayer. Her reaction was a jolt as though someone had just electrocuted her. And before releasing my grip, I used her name to command her to remain in her current form until I said otherwise. I picked her up and let her go, placing her on the edge of the bed that she was about to attack my nephew on. While my brother's wife and my sister patched me up, we inquired of the purpose that she had in this house. She answered calmly, as we finally got a really good look at her. Her body was like something you would see in a CGI model. Her proportions seemed to be slightly exaggerated, but not to a comic degree. Her tan and almost purple skin was flawless, minus the injuries that she had just incurred. Beautiful face, waistline to legs, and of course everything else. It would make even those most chaste men think of impurity. The horns, though similar to ram horns, were smooth to the touch and almost silky smooth like her hair. The wings, for being so freakishly strong, were rather thin and small given her size. I was having trouble figuring out how she could even fly with them. And then there is that dang tail. Though not very long, it was almost pure muscle. Just looking at it made me feel more pain, and I wanted to rip it off of her pelvic bone. She did apologize for her actions, but that didn't make me feel any better. I'm going to need to pick up a donut later to do that. After getting the entire situation, I had to restrain my sister from going after the creature with a kitchen knife. It was her son that was nearly attacked after all. Although, thanks to my brother's level-headed thinking, we came up with a better idea. Since she is a demon, we made a deal. She would protect the family from harm whenever possible, along with keeping other demons away. In return, the houses that the family lived in would become sanctuary for her. Though, she would have to make herself known to the family. She would not have to reveal herself unless she was asked by one of the family. She would only take from the family that which is freely given, and must repay with something of equal value. If another demon became a threat to her, she would simply need to bring us a name and we could aid her in protection from harm. In return, she could have free reign on attacking those who take advantage of the family. All in all, a good deal for both sides. Now, I wouldn't have made this deal without a little insurance. Since I know her name, I can call her back whenever I need to. Though it is a very bad idea to push the boundaries of a deal like this, I'll still keep it in my back pocket, just in case. When everything was said and done, she stood up and walked to me. I asked her if she was ready to seal the contract, and she was. For those that don't know, if you're going to seal a contract with a succubus, you need to exchange fluids and, like an old letter, seal it with a kiss. Since she had bitten me, which I would need stitches for, we had covered the first part, and I gave her the quick kiss that she had wanted. I made sure not to linger in order to make sure I didn't fall under her sway. After this, we walked her to the back door and watched as she faded away, as she walked through the threshold. That was almost 10 years ago now, and she has protected us from several things. Things like my niece almost getting in a car wreck, or my brother almost missing out on his daughter's birthday due to his awful boss. Even helping my nephew find a good girl to date and eventually marry. She had even come to visit me when she needs to hide for a while, though I keep having to tell her to put on some clothes. Not that I mind, but I have very large windows in this house. I know when she goes after the bad guys in this town, and I can't help but smile. Though, I did have to laugh maniacally when she found out that an ex-girlfriend was planning on hurting me when social media became a thing. Nothing like a visit from a succubus or her incubus friends while you're live streaming to get you banned. With all this, I just hope God doesn't mind that this family's guardian angel isn't an angel.